Much everyone for tuning into and staying with 90 minutes on this Wednesday morning, the 18th day of June 2014. This program is weekdays. I want to say a special good morning today to several OECS partner stations which are following us because of the discussion that we're having this morning. June 18th, I told you about something in Egypt. What else is June 18th? It's OECS Day. That is the date back in 1981 that the Treaty of Basel was signed. In the city of that name, the city of the treaty, the St. Kitts and Nevis capital, establishing the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. It's a very special institution to us because they are our institutional neighbors, so to speak. They're just a few yards from Radio St. Lucia here on Mon Fortune in Castries. Yes, that's where the OECS Secretariat is. And we are not only talking about the original Treaty of Basel, which was signed on June 18th in 1981, but the revised Treaty of Basel establishing the OECS Economic Union was fittingly signed on June 18th also in 2010 and came into force in about 6 months later in January 2011. So much to talk about. I'll tell you, this is one of the occasions I didn't read too much. I didn't do too much preparation work because I don't have to. I've got all the people here who can talk knowledgeably about the OECS to us, especially in certain aspects which I'm sure will be of great interest to you, such as tourism, social development. And some time ago you heard me have a program about, the blue economy. Yes, the ocean economy. Using the oceans to advance our economic development and our wealth and those things, because we are very small islands surrounded by a lot of ocean. So can we sustainably exploit more of the ocean resources for our development? It's one of my little pet subjects that I like to talk about, and this morning I'm sure we'll be able to explore it in greater detail. What are we talking about the OECS? Well, we're speaking about several independent territories and a couple non-independent ones, and I think we also have one or two associate members. So let me say good morning without any further ado to my panelists. They're all from the OECS Secretariat, and they are in the persons of, I'll go with the principle of ladies first, Dr. Asha Singh. She's head of the Oceans Governance Unit. We also have with us Dr. Lorraine Nicholas. She's the Program Officer for Tourism at the OECS Secretariat. And the head of the Social Policy Unit, David Popo, is with us this morning as well. Now, let me say especially to those of, our partner stations throughout the OECS who are following this program, some of whom may be carrying it live as well. Please feel free at any time to call in if you have any questions or you want to make any contribution. You can do so by emailing us, and the email is live. That's live@rslonline.com. Yes, live@rslonline.com. You can send us text messages from a line cell phone. The text board number is 775. From a Digicel mobile, it's 973, and the telephone number to call, area code 758-452-3959. Ladies and gentlemen, economic issues are at the top of everybody's mind throughout the OECS right now, and we understand the global economic crisis, the impact it has had on the sub-region, on the fiscal situation, on our exports, on our dependence, on foreign assistance and so on, which has not been forthcoming as usual. I am asking any of you who want to take it first, how is the OECS helping with the situation that is affecting so many of the member states? Now, I don't want to make my question too long-winded so that you lose what it really is. Even here in St. Lucia, and I'm not inviting you to comment on local situations, we're hearing about the need to maybe cut wages and so on, or maybe to retrench people. And yet we have an OECS, which is basically a transnational bureaucracy. OECS people like yourselves are civil servants. You are regional. Dr. Len Ishmael doesn't like the word sub-regional, but I think we often use it to denote the OECS as being a smaller grouping, not really a subset of CARICOM, but smaller grouping than CARICOM itself. You are regional civil servants and so on. In what way can this grouping help the governments to overcome the economic problems which have been besetting all of them? I shouldn't say how can it, how is it helping them? Any of you can take a first shot at it. For example, in the area of tourism, we have Dr. Lorraine Nicholas with us. And of course, David, that doesn't mean in social policy you can't also take it.
Thank you, Shelton. The OECS tourism program developed a common tourism policy for the region. And this policy, what it seeks to do is to enhance the competitiveness of tourism in the OECS. The reality is, Shelton, that we live in an internationally competitive environment as far as tourism is concerned. And the sector is becoming increasingly competitive. You have a number of destinations emerging in South Asia, the Pacific, in South America. And ironically, whilst we depend so much on tourism in the OECS, our market share has been declining. And even though we are deemed to be the most tourism-dependent region in the world, our market share only accounts for just about 0.1% of international tourists. And what is even more concerning, Shelton, is that this market share has been declining over the past 5 years. So what the OECS Tourism Desk is seeking to do is to work closely with our member states to develop activities and initiatives which could have a synergistic effect by adding value to the tourism activities of individual member states. So we are not seeking any way to duplicate what our member states are doing, but what we want to do is to work with member states to add value to their work and to allow them to benefit more than they would have benefited had they operated as individual member states. One of the areas that we're doing that is in the yachting sector, where one of the benefits to our member states is that we intend for them to benefit from the notion of economies of scale, where they would benefit from reduced unit costs, since we will be going to an international boat show, which is the Annapolis Boat Show in October, where we will be going there as one space. The OECS will be represented as one space. So member states will benefit from economies of scale where the unit cost per space would be reduced for them.
David, the social policy unit, I have a caller who very often phones into this program and makes the point repeatedly that we are not socially developed.
Yes,
In terms of the social development that we need in the region, and how it is intertwined with our other requirements. We often focus only upon the economics of our existence and so on, but we don't realize the great impact that social issues and the need for social policy. So you can take us down that road at least.
Right. Thank you very much, Sheldon. I just want to first of all say that we are now basically celebrating a major milestone in terms of the OECS integration process. Today is actually 33 years since the establishment of the OECS Member States Secretariat. And as you were saying, we have since revised the treaty and towards the establishment of what has been called an economic union. I had the opportunity sometime last year to be part of an OECS team in which we went around the various member states and talking to the broad citizenry in terms of what is meant by the economic union. And the questions were across the board in terms of what is the benefit of such an economic union with respect to the ordinary person in the street. Very often you get the feedback that the OECS Secretariat or Commission, as we are now called, is some kind of elitist organization that is not in touch with the realities and the everyday lives of people. That we are probably somewhere at the mon, doing things, providing some kind of level or degrees of strategic policy advice to governments. The thing is that if we are saying, as you said in your preamble, that the world is really a world of harsh realities. We are seeing the impact of severe economic downturns. We are seeing that that the world, as a result of technology, that we are more connected. But it was I think it was recently it was Pope Francis who said that that the world may be more interconnected by technology, but we have become less brothers and sisters.
So we are more disconnected.
We are more disconnected. I think that's a very important observation made. We are seeing as well that one of the principal objectives of the OECS Economic Union and towards the deepening of the integration process is that we as 9 small island member states with limited resources, with small size, we haven't got that mass, as it were, that we cannot effectively address some of the economic issues that you spoke about. And therefore, it is important that we come together. So in a sense, what we are saying today is that coming together as 9 member states, or in fact, in the wider Caribbean, makes more sense with respect to addressing some of the global issues. But I want to say that that although by definition we're talking about an economic union, at the heart, and the member states and the OECS authority have recognized that at the heart of any integration process has to be obviously people. And therefore, if we are not touching the lives, the livelihoods, if we are not strengthening the quality of life of the ordinary citizen within that single space, then in effect, we can very well understand the kind of cynicism that we've had across the Caribbean from since the 50s in terms of integration processes. So I just want to plug in, Shelton, that within the revised treaty, the protocol member states have recognized that you may have all your economic strategies, which are very important in terms of stimulating growth. But we have seen, whether it be at the international level, like in places like India, for example, where you've had growth, but without development, but without human development. And the point here is that the Commission has recognized that the social development and protection of our citizens constitute an integral process in terms of underpinning all the strategies in terms of economic growth, and also as well to sustain the process. So that we have heard very often that that the cost of the government. There was a study done by CARICOM in 2011-12. The cost to our economies in terms of youth and crime and violence is extremely high, approximately 11%, of GDP. So there is a cost. So if those things are not addressed, then what we are doing is that we are seeing the constant deepening of structural inequalities, so people who have, people who do not have. We have seen a constant cracking of people who are falling into poverty across the OECS Economic Union. And if we do not address those issues, we will see, of course, the rapid and the continual escalation of young people who can't find jobs, thousands leaving the school, trying to enter in terms of the job market, cannot get jobs. We are seeing families who were above the poverty line falling into and below the poverty line. So we've seen the depth of poverty being exacerbated. And these have obviously implications in terms of how do you stabilize your societies, so that in stabilizing your societies, you can have a much more coherent approach with respect to your economic growth and development strategies. So in essence, what I'm saying is that the economic union, as espoused, as envisioned by the member states, is one which has to be done in a way that is integrated. We cannot see social development as an appendage of the economic policies. It has to be a new approach where economics talking to issues in terms of human development. And that is the thrust, the new approach with respect to the revised treaty.
All right, okay, wonderful. A little later, David, I want to ask you whether the OECS has ever done any kind of surveys to find out how the OECS is perceived on the ground or within the territories and so on. People have their notions, and I can tell you those notions are changing rapidly about government, about the value of government, about the cost of government. And so we probably will have to talk about the cost of the OECS and whether people see it as another layer of bureaucracy that is just sucking up resources and that's diverting away from what they consider to be their essential needs. But we'll get back to that in just a moment. I think it's time now to turn to Asha. You're easily my favorite on this program, Oceans, Government, and so on. I'm not a fisherman or anything of that sort, but I'm very fascinated. Tell us about the Oceans Governance Unit. Pardon my ignorance if it sounds kind of new to me. I've heard about ESDU in the past, the Sustainable Development Unit and so on. But Oceans Governance, what exactly are we talking about, and what is encompassed in the mission and work of your unit?
Okay. Sheldon, viewers, thank you for having. I'm so grateful to be sharing this space with you this morning. With regard to ocean governance, it's a fairly new unit, but I just want to give you a background. The OECS recognized among our 9 member states that under the United Nations Framework Convention on the Law of the Sea, where many of us have claimed a large swath of the marine environment, many 200 nautical miles, recognize the importance of the marine environment Now, the marine environment is just not this big blue wilderness. It's actually an area that provides a lot of goods and services to us, though sometimes we do not even measure it or do not appreciate it. So what has happened over the last few years is just a move to do more collective management of our ocean space. We recognize that with this large marine space, with limited capacity that my colleague spoke to earlier, that we really need now to look at how we manage the space. Now, in 2013, the heads of government approved the Eastern Caribbean Regional Oceans Policy. And that policy gives us set the framework for us to manage the marine environment in a more collective manner. With that policy came the Ocean Governance Unit, and in 2014, in February of this year, it became functional. And part of our work is to implement that ECROP that we currently call the ECROP, or the Regional Ocean Policy, where we have some initiatives that are done at a regional level, for example, boundary delimitation, and also some activities that are done at a national level.
All right. What have been some of the priority areas that have occupied the attention of the Ocean Governance Units? I mean, I know we have fisheries issues, we have sustainable development issues with how we exploit it, whether it be lobsters, whether it be other issues that come to the fore, our coral reefs and so on, what's happening to them. What have been some of the things that have been top of the pile in terms of the agenda you've had to address?
We have many things on top of the pile, but one of the priority is the issue of boundary delineation. What we've recognized that we are talking about a blue economy. You alluded to earlier about a blue economy. We realize that there's a lot of potential in the marine environment, but how can we manage that space if we do not know what we have or what we're managing?
Especially since we don't have a continuous space. We've got, for example, Martinique and the French territories in between and so on. Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
But even, for example, St. Lucia, if we do not delineate our boundaries, how can we assert our rights on this space, and how can we do have our responsibilities being done at the national and regional level? So boundary delineation has become one of the priority areas for us. Now, in this regard, what we want to do is to start delineating boundaries within our member states, and the intention there is that once we have built the capacity to delineate boundaries and we have that level of capacity within the member states, now we can move on to do boundary delineation with the other countries. So that has been one of the priority areas for us is boundary delineation. And of course we have other issues. For example, we want to start looking at the whole issue of marine spatial planning. We need to know what we have in the marine environment. So that is also one of the priority areas that we're looking at. We also recognize that science must inform our policy. Our policy must be grounded in sound science. So we're also moving ahead of formulating a marine research strategy, of which that would support some of our work that we're doing in ocean governance.
Okay. And of course, when we talk about the delineation of the boundaries, I'm sure this has great implications for the 200-mile exclusive economic zone that our countries are supposed to enjoy, but which can be pretty tricky, I understand, because of the way the archipelago is and so on. So is that part of it all, or is that outside of the,
yes,
the delineation you're talking about?
Shelton, we have all went ahead and we have indicated that we will be claiming 200 nautical miles. But in the Caribbean, we are actually in one of the most, I think, a special area in the world, because we have the highest concentration of countries within a small area. So by any means, we may not have 200 nautical miles, any one of our countries may have 200.
Except, of course, on the east and west sides and so on,
yes,
which you can go.
Yes,
but north
on the
and
Atlantic
south,
side, we
north and
probably
south,
have a little bit more.
Yeah,
yes.
because you don't have
but
that.
in the Caribbean Sea, that has become something that we have to share less than 200 nautical miles. But having said that, that brings home the point of us needing to ensure that we manage the space in a collective manner. The reason being is that many of the resources, for example, you spoke of fisheries, many of these resources are shared. And you may have a good management effort here, but if, for example, another state does not have that good management effort, our effort here is actually of no use.
Right.
So therefore, it makes a lot of sense for us to look at this marine space. And I should mention to you, these boundaries fishes do not see the man-made boundaries,
No, they don't.
These things do not adhere to any boundaries. So it makes a lot of sense for us to collectively manage the space. And hence, ocean governance is becoming very critical in the OECS if we want to really look at alternative options for economic development, as we are aware of all the economic downturn and the influences it's having on the OECS member states.
All right. I could talk with you on and on and on. The month of June, this is around the time of the year when issues of whaling and so on peak, and we do know that different territories have different policies on this whole matter of whaling and marine mammals and so on, the sensitivity of international tourism. But of course, like I said, I'll stick with you throughout the whole program if I go this way. But now that we're talking about oceans governance, it kind of shows me that there is obviously at least one link or crossover point between your unit and that of Lorraine's, the tourism desk and so on, and it is yachting.
Yes.
It is a matter which deals with the oceans, and yet it has a profound connection with tourism and so on. We've heard Mr. Cuthbert Didier, the yachting consultant, and I think he's done some work with the OECS as well, speak a lot about this very underutilized, largely untapped potential for the development of our tourism. While I was in Antigua, I remember speaking with some people from, the Antigua and Barbuda Tourism and Marine Association and so on, and the matter of yachting is one that has come up quite a lot. Is there any special thrust within the tourism desk that has to do with yachting that maybe you can tell us about, Lauren?
Indeed, Shelton. As you said, we at the OECS Tourism Desk have recognized the untapped potential of the yachting sector. In fact, we have identified and distinguished the yachting sector as one which provides the clearest potential to operationalize the single shared space of the economic union. Yachtspersons, as they call them, are essentially transient visitors. They like to move from one state to the next. And so, given their high socioeconomic profile, we are really keen on targeting yachtspersons. And so we have an OECS yachting committee, which is very, very dedicated to the yachting sector. And we have actually an action plan for the yachting sector. And one of this is what I spoke to earlier, joint representation at international boat shows. So in October, the OECS will be going to Maryland at the Annapolis Boat Show as one unit, basically to seek to sell ourselves as one sailing destination where visitors can come to and move freely within that space, the shared space of the OECS.
Sometime before I was hearing about, was it the Grand Pavois
Yes.
boat show somewhere in the Canary Islands or something?
Yes.
How did this pan out eventually? It kind of seemed like something I don't hear much about anymore.
Actually, St. Lucia and Mr. Didier always commends the work that was done during Grand Pavois, because he's saying up to today, St. Lucia is still reaping benefits from their presence at Grand Pavois, where we're getting tourists from France and Europe coming to the region, sailing through the region. So Grand Pavois was very, very, very successful, and this is why we are repeating such an event, because we think that the region is a very attractive sailing destination given our configuration as an archipelago of islands.
And by my reckoning, today is 33 years since the Treaty of Bastille establishing the OECS was signed. In the studio this morning, Dr. Asha Singh, she's head of the Oceans Governance Units, Lauren Nicholas, Dr. Lauren Nicholas, Program Officer for the Tourism Desk at the OECS Secretariat, and David Popo, Head of the Social Policy Unit, who I'll now be asking about the perceptions of the OECS. Have you all ever done any kind of surveys or drawn any feedback as to how the OECS is perceived by people throughout the sub-region, for want of a better term?
One of the questions that our new Director General, Dr. Jules, has asked the staff of the Commission to ask is, what is the added value that we are contributing in terms of the work of the OECS Commission? Have we really made an impact in terms of people's lives? The policies that we have established, has there been resonance, on people's lives? And as I was saying early on, that we have gone across the member states promoting the economic union. A team of us, we have indicated to the member states that the OECS Secretariat, the OECS Commission, we now call the Commission, that we have over the years, for the past 30 years, I mean, you referred to a number of directors generals who have contributed. We have mobilized with our donor partners millions of dollars, whether it be in terms of strengthening the member states with respect to their own capacity, whether it be in the context of environment and sustainable development, tourism development, health policies, education. So we have had a multiplicity of interventions, of development interventions. And therefore we have to take stock that, have we made an impact? Have we seen, for example, the constant issue of addressing poverty? Have we facilitated the process, whether it be in terms of resources of policy backstopping to our governments? That we can see that after 30 years, the citizens of the OECS Economic Union are better off. And therefore it brings into question the very same observation that people are making. Civil servants in the country are fully aware of the work of the OECS Commission over the years. There may be some persons who operate within civil society, whether it be trade unions and other organizations, that are aware of the work of the Secretariat. But I think that the feedback that we are getting is that the work that we have done thus far is important, but not necessarily touching the lives of the ordinary citizen. I mean, for example, let's look at sports. You know, you ask people, what do you know of the OECS Secretariat? And they tell you, well, yeah, there was a sports program. Yeah. So a person like Respira and those guys. Right. The issue of the free movement, for example, we're now talking about in the context of the revised Treaty of Bastia and the establishment of the single space. Yes. One of the burning questions is about, okay, how do we move? The governments have signed off, and when we move, what happens? So I can say, for example, from my own experience in terms of the social protection and social development aspect of the revised treaty, people are saying, look, okay, especially the young people, if I move from St. Lucia or from Antigua to St. Lucia, and I might have enjoyed some rights with respect to and benefits in terms of accessing education. So, for example, in Antigua, I'm sure you know, Sheldon, it is compulsory for you to go to school up to the age of, I think, 16 or 18.
16, I think.
16, right?
I think so. I'm sorry, I could be wrong.
Yeah, so you have legislation guiding governments in terms of education and access. You have, in most of the countries, for example, social safety nets, where families are given school books, there's food provisions, dental health care, etc., etc. So one of the questions that we had from hundreds of young persons in the member states is, if my family moves from Antigua to St. Lucia, will I be able to enjoy the same level in terms of educational attainments in St. Lucia? And these are some of the issues in terms of enjoying within the single space social security systems, health, and education. And as I was saying earlier on, that we have listened to hundreds of young persons within the OECS region, out of the population of 500,000. We are talking about approximately 250,000 persons who are in school. So they obviously thinking about in terms of economic integration, but for them is, okay, hey, once I have left school at the age of 16 or 17, what do I do? Do I come across with St. Lucia, freedom of movement of skills and services? Can I get a job there? Can I enjoy the same kind of privileges? And these are some of the issues that we are hearing, and therefore it really, really becomes imperative for us who work with the Commission to ensure that our work touches, resonates on the lives of especially the future labor force and young people.
Excellent. And David, in a while, I want to come and ask you whether the OECS and the work that people like yourself are doing, whether you are being, I wouldn't say unfairly, but it's kind of being shortchanged in that the perception of you is always seen through the prism of the national government, because let us face it, the OECS is really an intergovernmental kind of association and so on, and you deal on the basis of the governments who support the OECS and contribute to it. The people out there don't really interface directly with the OECS. You're not politicians who go on a platform and speak to the people of Castries and so on, but perhaps people only see you through what their governments are doing. I want to come back to that point in a while. But when you speak about the difference in, for example, the social security benefits and privileges that you may get in one territory, it speaks about the need for greater harmonization in the stances that we take. And that was what I was coming to Asha a while ago in terms of, we are still sovereign states, well, for the most part, okay, barring we're talking about Montserrat, Anguilla, and, the BVI associate member, I think, and so on. But we're still sovereign states. We still contract our own agreements and take our own positions in international fora. And one of them, for example, on the matter of whaling and other things pertaining to, the use of the ocean's resources and so on. We know that different countries have different views on that, where we are with Japan, where we are with China as opposed to Taiwan and so on. How have those different positions played out where oceans government is concerned within the OECS? For example, using this one as example, the whaling issue.
Well, the issue is that we must respect state sovereignty. And I think that is first and foremost. However, there are many areas that we can find ways of how we can support government and support their initiatives. But ocean governance is not about telling people, well, our governments, that you must not sign on to this convention, you must not sign on to that convention, because every government must be accountable to its people to drive their own economic well-being. However, ocean governance is a vehicle to support common policies that we all see that we can actually come together and manage.
So is it
for
that you look at
development.
where there are common policies that you see how you can strengthen them, or do you serve as a unit, an advisory unit that gives the kind of policy advice and urges government to take certain positions that would be in the benefit of our countries? For example, let me just look at it. We have troublesome issues, and many have cast it within the argument of the right to the sustainable use of marine resources. And we can easily come with the troublesome matter. We're not big on whaling. Yes, St. Kitts is given a quota of, I think, four whales per year, which they hardly ever use up. Most they do is 2. But we have the turtle issue, where, here in St. Lucia, our fisheries and Ministry of Fisheries has a policy of the sustainable use of turtles, that we can use turtles and without endangering the resource. There is also the policy on small cetaceans. Like I say, we're not big on minke whales and this kind of thing. But small cetaceans, porpoises and those kind of things and so on, that we can take them sustainably. Other countries may differ, they may have, many would say, knuckled into the international lobby of the Greenpeace and those who put pressure on them. And still there is an argument that says this is a matter which is not just left to the preference. Food security is at stake here. We have vast ocean spaces which have the means that they can support our protein needs if we do it in a sustainable way and so on. To what extent does the Oceans Governance Unit supply advice to governments on what would be perhaps the most sensible position to take on those issues, so that there is harmonization of a position beyond just saying, okay, this is where we have commonalities, so the Oceans Governance Unit will see where we can strengthen those commonalities. How do you try to establish new commonalities?
Well, with the e-crop, it actually put many of the issues into perspective, and I think with the agreement by the governments to approve the Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy is also a testimony to each government have that commitment to take up issues at the regional level. Now, with regard to issues of commonality and perhaps issues of differences as well,
yes.
I think we, where it's necessary and where we are able to support our member states to provide any information in terms of scientific underpinning that can support their decisions, we do that. We try as much as possible to the extent that we are given that opportunity to do that. In addition, we also want to promote greater awareness of the oceans, so that policymakers, in making their decisions, they are not making decisions in isolation, but rather they are making decisions that are common. And at the same time, what it is doing, it is breaking down these silos that we have. We have a number of policies, we may have a number of initiatives, but once we can continue to build awareness and have these common approaches, piece by piece, we are breaking down the barriers and incorporating greater synergies into the way we manage the ocean. At the end of the day, Sheldon, all what we're trying to do is actually to do two things. We're trying to protect the marine environment and also to harness the resources that is within that environment. And in order to do that, we must ensure that our policies are in tandem with these two items. And that brings me to the point of what are some of the things one might think, okay, we have the oceans there, but I can't see it being connected to me. Like David alluded to this whole issue of poverty. But we, for example, we have fisheries, which is something that we harness a lot of the marine and fisheries for our dietary needs, but also it forms a small proportion of our economic sector. We also have issue of the tourism. Now, very easily, sometimes we do not see that link of tourism with the marine environment. Now, if you look at the tourists, what they come here for? Sun, sea, sand, sit on the beach, snorkel, etc. And if we do not maintain the integrity of the marine environment, those same surface that we rely on, it's been crumbling under our feet. For example, we may have issues of pollution. We have issues of pollution of all forms. For example, land-based sources, agroforestry. Now, these get into the marine environment, affect the coral reef, seagrass, mangroves, etc. That in turn affect the fisheries because some of them are critical nursery habitats for our fishery. But also we have the other pressure, for example, the effects of climate change, etc. So there are so many issues that we must manage. But at the end of the day, once we are able to sustainably manage our living and non-living resources and manage our pollution, then we are able to capture the rent of the marine environment for the well-being of our citizens.
Okay, I'm very intrigued that between the states there would be differences that they need to reconcile, and I've just used things like the whaling and turtles as one example. But it seems to me that even within the OECS there may be interdepartmental differences of perspective that sometimes you may need to iron out in making policy. For tourism-minded people say, don't touch the whales, don't touch the dolphins, don't touch the turtles. They're valuable for attracting tourists. So you should adopt an enshrining of the resource approach to it, so that it lends to the picturesqueness of your destination and people will come to see the turtles and swim with the turtles and so on, right?
Yes.
The consumptive-minded ones who are concerned about our food security will say it is possible for us to take some of them and not drive them to extinction. How does a tourism desk, for example, balance that out in giving the kind of advice that says whether we should, on anything, let's say it's like the turtles or the dolphins or whatever, whether we should be taking a consumptive approach or an enshrinement approach to it for the sake of tourism and so on? Do those kinds of conflicts and those delicate balancing acts ever become issues for your unit, Lauren?
Not specifically, Sheldon, because we are just in the process of developing a sustainable tourism program for the tourism desk. But sustainable tourism development is really a priority for us, where we not only focus on the economics of tourism, because we know many persons see tourism as an economic sector, but we also try to promote the ecological aspect of it as well as the social aspect. But Sheldon, yes, I've been responding to your questions, but the tourism desk has been doing a lot of exciting things that I'm really excited to talk about as far as it concerns the impact to the communities and impact to the people in the region. So if I may just speak about that for a while.
Lauren Nicholas can tell us about the great initiatives that have been undertaken successfully so by the tourism desk at the OECS Secretariat. I can tell you she is raring to go and seemingly in fine form this morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with 90 Minutes on this Wednesday morning. It's OECS Day, June 18th, 2014, 33 years since the OECS was established by treaty in the St. Kitts and Nevis capital, Basseterre. We have with us in the studio Dr. Lauren Nicholas. She is the head of the tourism desk at the OECS Secretariat, among with two others in the persons of Dr. Asha Singh, head of the governance unit at the OECS Secretariat, and Mr. David Popo. He is with the social development unit of the OECS Secretariat. Lauren, tell us about I think it's a community tourism program, is it?
Well, Shelton, the tourism desk has been fortunate to receive funding under the 10th EDF project amounting to almost 7 million euros. Yes, to implement the recommendations in the Common Tourism Policy. And speaking of having a direct impact on communities and the people who live in the OECS, this is what we have been trying to achieve at the tourism desk. In fact, the vision for tourism in the OECS is that we will develop a sector that is resilient, viable, sustainable, whilst improving the quality of life of OECS citizens. And so we have been working closely with communities in 2013 to assist them in developing their product, because many studies and research findings have showed that why we are not so competitive in the region is because of our product. For example, last year there was a tourism competitiveness and benchmarking assessment done for St. Lucia. And one of the major findings of that study is that St. Lucia has not emphasized the use of local products to deliver a quality visitor experience compared to the countries that were being compared, like Jamaica and Mauritius, where they have utilized the cuisine, the food, the music in the tourism product. We focus more on the demand side of tourism as opposed to the supply side. So we use tourism and we see tourism as an end in itself rather than a means to an end. So we focus on bringing tourists to our islands, and we measure the performance of the sector by the number of tourists or the increase in the number of tourists. But really what we should be doing is to measure the impact of the visitors on our growth and our economic growth and development. So using tourism as a vehicle to reduce poverty, to reduce unemployment, to improve the lives of our citizens. And so this is why we have been working through our communities to assist them in benefiting more directly from tourism. And some of the things we did, we went to Jamaica in November on a study tour where we took 20 persons from across the OECS to see how Jamaica had developed community-based tourism. Because what Jamaica has done is that they have about 20 festivals, the community-based tourism. Yes. Jamaica, one of the strategies that they have used is to have festivals. So they have the Portland Jerk Festival, they have the Trelawney Seafood Festival, they have the Little Ochi, they have the Yam Festival, the Breadfruits Festival, and all this is with a view to increasing local involvement in tourism and maximizing the direct benefits from tourism so that persons get direct earnings from tourism. And this is what we should be doing, because there are so many implications of having persons benefit directly from tourists. If, for example, persons in Choiseul don't see tourists, they only see tourists passing in vehicles. They do not see tourists walking in the streets. They don't relate to tourists. They cannot make a direct association with tourists. How would they feel? How would a young man from Choiseul feel if they just went to mug a tourist? Perhaps nothing, because they don't feel that sense of ownership of the sector. They don't relate to the sector. So this is what we're trying to do. We're seeking to get the communities involved so that there is a greater sense of ownership of the sector, that they see tourism to benefit them directly. What we found when we went to Jamaica is that we in the OECS, we have no shortage of assets and resources geared towards community-based tourism. We went to places in Jamaica and drove for hours and hours, and we were like, this is what we're going to. This could be anywhere in Jamaica, in St. Lucia, anywhere in St. Vincent, anywhere in Dominica. But what we are lacking is the mindset to transform these resources into viable business opportunities. And this is what we are working now with our member states to help them develop their business plans, to organize their product and build their products. And we've been working with the Montserrat Festival that they have in July. We're working with Dominica, the Portsmouth Community Tourism Association. We're working in Antigua with the Sweets Body Pond Adventure Group. Another thing, Shelton, as we're talking about economic union that we're doing at the tourism desk, which I think is very vital, is the whole notion of ease of travel. We have a huge action plan that we're working very vigorously on right now to facilitate ease of travel. And one of the key things we're working on now is the notion of that when visitors come to the region now, that they will only clear customs and immigration at the initial port of entry, and they will be able to move around within that shared space without having to clear customs and immigration again. Only last week I was in Barbados at a training that we coordinated for customs and immigration officers so that they would be able to share information. They went there to use a system called CARIB-6, the CARICOM Integrated Border Control System, so that they can share information on subjects of interest that are attempting to transit our region. And they could also manage You have deportees coming to our region who are moving from one island to the other. Now that we are easing our borders, so to speak, and liberalizing it so that people can move without having every time to go through customs and immigration, we need to have checks and balances in place, and this is what we are working on. The whole issue of people complaining about having to move their shoes in Antigua, in Barbados, when they're traveling through the region, we are also working closely with the ECA, the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, to eliminate multiple checks at for in-transit passengers when going through the region. And what we have we have done a lot of work in that area. Member states need to meet 5 minimum civil aviation requirements. We have 2 member states outstanding, and they are really keeping this process behind. The ministers, when we met in April, we have now set a deadline of November for all member states to come on board to meet these requirements, so that we would not have, when we go to Antigua, to take off our shoes, to take off our belt, and these things. The whole question of air transportation, the cost of traveling the region. People say it's more expensive to go to Miami than to travel within the region. We are about to launch a tender for a consultant to undertake an empirical study of the factors that inhibit intra-regional travel, because the research is showing that intra-regional travel is on a decline. Now, we know that people might be, oh, not another study. But what we find is that we've been talking about this whole question of the lack of options for travel, modes of travel, the cost of travel, but we are not moving anywhere. So we are bringing in this consultant to tell us this is what we need to do. They will undertake the requisite economic analysis of the cost structures of airfares and the impacts. They will do the necessary analysis with the scheduling, the routing, and so on, to see exactly what we need to do to address this issue of air transportation, of intra-regional travel in our midst. So this is just a snapshot of what we're doing, and I'm happy that I got to talk about it, Shelton. So thank you very much for giving me that opportunity.
You're welcome anytime. Let's go back to David Pope. I was asking you a while ago that for all the wonderful work, and I mean some of it has just been enunciated here by Lorraine and so on, there is a possibility that people will only see the OECS and the work that it does through the prism of their national governments. People are unhappy with their governments, not just in the Caribbean but around the world. They're blaming the governments for the economic situation. Incumbents are always under pressure at election time and so on. Yet the OECS continues to do work, wonderful work, through the Pharmaceutical Procurement Service, through the tourism desk. We've heard from Asher about the oceans governance and so many other things. Your education policies, your education unit, and all these other things that you are doing, your economic unit and so on of the OECS will never know the great contribution that it is making. Sound policies without them, how bad things might have been and so on. But how can the OECS go about to have a perception of itself? I know you've had education programs in the past. Does it really matter what people think of the OECS, that you know you're doing your work, or is there some kind of way that people should be made to understand what you're doing?
Yeah, well, thank you, Charlotte. I think, first of all, having been with the Secretariat for a number of years, and you're quite right, we have done tremendous amount of work in terms of the promotion of integration, in terms of the political union. I think it's an evolutionary process. We are now at the level of an economic union. I think one of the weaknesses of the OECS Commission is that we have not really sold out. We have not, in a very compelling way, sold our work to the broad community. The question that you raise in terms of what happens at the national level, and sometimes the dissonance between that and what we do at the regional level, I think that's going to be a constant tension. On the one hand, we have a mandate from the OECS member states, from the OECS authority, prime ministers and the people. Yet, on the other hand, we are also charged with the responsibility to mobilize resources, whether they be financial resources or human resources, so that we can add the value to the work of the member states. So I think, in a real sense, that tension is going to be there. However, I think we have the responsibility, and that is why, for example, we have seen the beefing up of the communications work at the OECS Commission. We have Judith Turville, who is a well-known communications specialist, and who has, with her team, is attempting to do exactly what you're saying, to ensure that there are some very key messages that can go out to the broad citizenry with respect to the work of the Commission and how we are, in effect, in terms of our major objectives, supporting governments throughout the length and breadth of the OECS countries to strengthen their capacity in terms of policies get towards growth and development, but at the same time keeping the focus that this thing is really about the peoples of the OECS region.
Okay. And we've almost run out of time, and just before we go, let me go back to Asha Singh. I've been doing some reading about Mauritius, which I think is making big on its plans to develop what it calls an ocean economy, to make that one of the main pillars of its development, and so on. Is the OECS Oceans Governance Unit, does it have any such big ambitions in terms of the development of an ocean economy for the OECS states, to make that one of the major pillars of our development? Or do we have maybe what many would consider a more realistic view of what's available to us? Exploitation of the oceans is not just something that can bring in the dough, but it requires the dough, the investment in a lot of technology and so on. I know you said earlier we have to find out what's really there. Some people say it may not only be fish, there could be the matter of precious metals and things about that. I've heard about magnesium pods being in abundance in certain parts of the ocean that can be exploited and all those sorts of things. So just tell us, are we in any way looking at, for example, the Mauritius model in terms of what we're trying to move forward with?
Well, I can tell you, if Mauritius can do it, what about 9 countries? Why can't we do it?
Okay.
And we have a lot of space, we have a lot of potential, and I think we are now on a good footing. We have a policy that is driving our ocean governance. We have a common understanding among our member states, and I think collectively we can actually achieve what Mauritius is trying to achieve and even more. And blue economy remain a priority for us in ocean governance, and we will make every effort to ensure that this continue to be priority, because the marine environment offers us a lot of opportunities. But I want to leave this program saying to the viewers that each and every one of you have a stake in the marine environment, and we must ensure that we play our role, from the common stakeholders to the fishermen to everyone, to ensure that this marine environment continue to provide the goods and services that we need, and even more, that what we have not even harnessed as yet, for us now and for our future generation. And we have the potential.
Okay, David Popo, why do I think I must give you the last word? Lauren already said thanks, so I won't bring her in anymore. As we move forward with the OECS, what do you think really would lie at the centerpiece of the people's hopes and aspirations in terms of the contribution that this organization can make in their future development, their stability, and meeting their needs?
Thank you very much, Sheldon. Let me just say that it has been 33 years of tremendous work with respect to the integration process. There is hope. I think that notwithstanding the despair that we sometimes see within our OECS region and among our citizens, the work of the OECS Commission is one which is critical with respect to the quality of lives of our peoples within the region. We have heard, for example, across all the sectors, whether it be in terms of the environment, as Asha was saying, the issue of tourism as one of the drivers of growth and development. But we're also hearing as well from the peoples themselves that they themselves want integration. They have been promoting integration. And I think it is for us now, as the policy advisors, as the technocrats, who are there to serve those very same people, to ensure that we can facilitate, strengthen our governments, the capacity of our governments with respect to deepening unity and integration process, with the view that we can be better players, as it were, in terms of the international and the global dynamics with respect to development, growth and development. So there is hope, and I think this is the perspective. And as I was saying earlier, that we now have a new Director General who will ensure, who's desirous of ensuring that we have a more integrated approach. So we're not just talking about ocean governance in isolation, tourism development in isolation. We're looking at the whole gamut, which impacts on the lives, the quality of lives of the people of this region. And I'm sure there'll be hope for the thousands of young persons who need jobs, the thousands of young persons who have aspirations, who want to make their lives better and to make a contribution.
Better
with respect
access
to
to
the
tertiary
development.
education and
Tertiary
things of that
education
sort, all of
as well.
that. Okay. David Popo, head of the Social Policy Unit, along with Dr. Lorraine Nicholas, Program Officer for Tourism, and Dr. Asha Singh, head of the Oceans Governance Unit at the OECS Secretariat. I want to thank you three for being my very good and very valuable guest this morning on OECS Day, 33 years since this organization was founded in Basse-Terre, St. Kitts. And I want to thank everyone for listening and for your participation, especially those in the other territories who've been following us through our OECS Newslink partner stations. Thank you very much, Shane Ross, for another wonderful job at Master Control. On behalf of all of us here at RSL 97, this is Shelton Daniel saying, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday safely